they don't get outgunned or out-resourced in these fights.
I think in a normal world, I would ask you whether it's worrisome that the DOJ is intervening, because the federal government generally has like a 98 or 99% success rate when they bring up these cases. But we're now actually seeing that completely flipped, where I think the latest reporting, maybe it was out of the Wall Street Journal, said that the DOJ and the rest of Trump world have something like a 96% failure rate as it relates to their efforts in the courts. And so how are you thinking about that? The fact that, you are going up against an adversary that is almost virtually always losing in these court cases.
Yeah, look, this is something I've written a lot about on Democracy Doc. The study you're talking about was from a Stanford professor who published this statistic. And as you say, showed that the Department of Justice is losing an astounding number of cases, percentage of the cases, well north of 90%. And in fact, if you look at the partisan breakdown of who appointed the judges, they're losing like an astounding number of the cases by Donald Trump appointed judges.
Right.
So it has definitely changed that dynamic, because you're right. Normally in the before times, before Donald Trump, when the Department of Justice lawyers stood up, they said, "I am here on behalf of the United States." And that meant that the judge was going to cut them a lot of breaks. They were going to cut them breaks that were small things like scheduling, when briefs would be due, what the order of things would be. But they'd cut them some other breaks that were not small breaks. They assumed that if a lawyer from the Department of Justice said a fact was a fact, the judge took it as the gospel.
Right.
If the Department of Justice came in and said, "Look, changing this voting law will cause real hardship," the judges took that as if that was a statement of fact, that this was backed up by the full faith and credit of the United States. And what's happened in all of these cases over the last 5 months is that judges have found themselves finding that the Department of Justice lawyers come in either ill-equipped, don't know the facts, or are saying things that actually turn out later not to be true at all. And they're also coming in with these attitudes like, "You're just a judge. Why do I have to pay attention to you?"
Right.
And so it has really undone one of the big advantages that the Department of Justice normally has in all kinds of cases. And I do think that's going to impact these voting cases as well, because the judges are not going to look at the Department of Justice like they are coming in to protect voters. They're thinking they're coming in, maybe slicing it a little too thin to try to protect the Republican Party. And after all, let's not forget, as you pointed out in your intro, the origin of this case, right? I mean, this whole thing starts with a gambit by the Republican Party.
Right. And do you presume that by virtue of the fact that all of this was shut down at the hands of the federal courts in North Carolina, is that going to have some at least atmospheric effect on how the North Carolina courts look at this now that this issue already has precedent as being shut down?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that the fact that this was so publicly litigated in North Carolina, I mean, this was traumatic, I think, for the voters and for the institutions of North Carolina, that for 5 months, Republicans were trying to overturn a free and fair election. And in the end, the judge who rejected all of this was a conservative, a very, very well-known conservative who had been nominated to the federal bench by Donald Trump.
Right.
So this was someone who had been selected for the federal judiciary by Donald Trump and with a very conservative pedigree. And that is, of course, going to play into this. Now, I think the Department of Justice is going to say, fine, that couldn't be applied retrospectively, but we should be allowed to now do this prospectively. And that is also the position that the Republican National Committee has taken in other cases like this. And so this is going to be a long, hard fight. I mean, I'm not here to say that this is going to be an easy fight, but these are the fights we take on because Donald Trump is an authoritarian. And right now, Donald Trump believes that what stands between him and his goal is two things. Number one, the courts. And that's why you see J.D. Vance and the Republicans all playing footsie with the idea of disregarding court orders, right, and the midterm elections. And of course, there'll be a very, very important set of elections in 2026, including in the state of North Carolina. And so, this is top of mind for Donald Trump and his sycophants.
Well, Mark, I should remind everybody that, yes, this effort ultimately failed, but it failed only after it jumped from the state court system to the federal court system. And yes, we did have a conservative Republican judge shut this down once it got into the federal court system, but an appeals court in North Carolina and the North Carolina Supreme Court both ruled in favor of Republicans. So is there any concern that as this issue goes through the state court system, you're in a state court system that thought that illegal, unconstitutional gambit by Republicans was actually fine? It wasn't until it got into the federal court system that it was actually shut down. But this isn't exactly friendly territory. This is actually hostile territory, because these people thought that something that was so illegal that even a Trump judge couldn't stomach it was palatable as far as they were concerned.
Yeah, I mean, just to put a little more detail to that, I mean, it is not just that the federal court judge couldn't palate it. I mean, the federal court judge was offended by it. I mean, as you say, what the state court approved, the federal judge who was nominated by Donald Trump, just thought was outrageous.
Yeah.
I mean, so that just tells you how far out that is. The other thing that gives concern, of course, is that, and you and I have done videos on this, that the state board of elections has now changed composition, right? The defendant in this case is the state board of elections. Well, that is now controlled by Republicans. So one of the reasons why we are looking to intervene and defend this case is because it's the Department of Justice under the control of Donald Trump's handpicked attorney general, and it is the North Carolina State Board of Elections, which is now under the control of the auditor. As you recall, they moved the power to appoint from the governor to the auditor. So we felt like, well, maybe someone who actually cares about voting rights ought to be in this case, trying to look out for the voters. So that's what we're looking to do. But yes, it is worrisome. All of that is worrisome. But here's the thing, and I want everyone to pay attention to this. Like, you can take one of two messages away from this. The first is that you can give up hope. And it really drives me crazy when I read in the comments, because I read the comments on our videos or on social media when I read those, people who are like, well, this is all just rigged. And, you're never going to, the courts are against us and Supreme Court's against us. And so all is lost. That's what Donald Trump wants you to think. That is what the Republicans are counting on. They are counting that the Department of Justice waltz in with all of their, gold embossed seals and the like, and everyone scurries away. Well, I'm not scurrying away. My law firm's not scurrying away. Our clients are not scurrying away, and we're going to fight. And what you find is that when you fight against these guys, you can win. And I'm not guaranteeing that'll be the case here, but it happens. So you cannot give up. You cannot give up hope. What everyone needs to do is they need to insist that the courts stand up for these voters. They need to insist that the courts stand up against Donald Trump, just in the same way that we have to insist that the courts stand up against Donald Trump when he takes powers he doesn't have and issues executive orders that he doesn't have the authority to issue. Just like they stand up to Kristi Noem and the rest of the cabinet when they do things that violate the law and the Constitution. And so we have to expect that our courts are going to do that, and we have to insist on it, and we have to celebrate them when they do, rather than just figure out a reason to continue to think things won't turn out well.
And look, I would just to build on that, if the guy who's actually litigating this stuff in the courts can have some optimism about the state of things as it relates to the judicial branch, then I think the rest of us can too. To that point, Mark, I would just finish off with this and ask, what are next steps here as this case continues to play itself out? Again, you've just kind of thrown your weight into this case with ELG. The Department of Justice is now involved in this case, and so what are next steps here?
Yeah, so hopefully the court will rule promptly on our motion to intervene, and if that is granted, as I hope and expect it will be, then it will to some extent be up to the Department of Justice how fast they want to move this case. We will obviously contest it and fight really hard, and we'll move as quickly as possible, and we'll see whether the Department of Justice is looking to move this fast or whether they just want this to linger so that they can make a larger point that they are fighting against voting rights, which is always, with Donald Trump, you never know. Maybe he just wants to say he's now suing to vindicate these rights in North Carolina. But I can promise you, everyone, this we're gonna do everything we can to protect the voting rights in North Carolina, just like we do everywhere else.
Well, look, I think I speak for everybody in saying that there's no other firm that we would rather have litigating this fight. And so one small step that we all on the outside watching this right now could take to show some support for Mark and his team is to subscribe to the YouTube channel, Democracy Docket. This way you can elevate Mark's voice in this broader media ecosystem, which is especially important right now. So I'll put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything to do that. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.